Many the people, longing, yearning to belong. Let us be servants to one another, signs of your kingdom come. Christ be our light, shine in our hearts. Christ, shine in your church, gathered today. Amen. Should gays and lesbians be allowed to be married in the church? Do you believe Jesus? If you don't believe in Jesus, can you go to heaven? Is having an abortion a sin? If you don't believe all of the creed, can you still be a Christian? Is there a Satan? Do you believe there's a heaven or a hell? These are some of the questions I was asked by a group of women as we discussed faith, sitting around the fireplace on the Isle of Iona this summer during my sabbatical. So when the Pharisees asked Jesus, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? I think he got off easy. The difference between the two groups of questioners, though, is in the intention of their questions. On Iona, it was a group of people who were longing to go deeper in their walk with God. For the first time, some of them were in a safe enough place where they could ask those hard questions that they felt had kept them from being in a church community and even held them at a distance from God. They were free to ask their deepest questions. And in that time, we had this opportunity to somehow dismantle, in even some small way, some of those barriers. Jesus' questioners, on the other hand, are not there with good intent. They are there to test him. And they bring before Jesus the controversy of their day, the divorce question. Now, if it was today, Jesus might have been asked, well, what do you think about gun control? Well, I want to know what you think on the death penalty or marriage equality, although this is the question of today. They are concerned with what is permissible, not with what is possible. They don't know who they're messing with, and Jesus does not get caught in their trap. Rather, he turns their presumptions about what is marriage and divorce, he turns it upside down. And instead, he traps them in their malintent and hopefully redirects them from just what is permissible to what is possible. What is possible? What is possible in marriage and family? Notice their question. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Back in the day, it was only the man who could divorce his wife, at least in the Jewish community. In the Roman community of the time, a woman could begin divorce proceedings. But you see, that was the government of the time, and this is the religion of the time. Do you see some similarities? Then a man could simply write a certificate and divorce her. The crime could be that she was unchaste, or that she was barren, or that she'd burned the lamb chops. Equal could be the crime, and she would be divorced. She would then have no rights. Women were left penniless, although some today are still left penniless, but women were left penniless. Because in those days, women left their father and mother and moved in with their husband's family. And so then they were to be cared for the rest of their lives. The other note in Jewish culture, though, in terms of adultery, was that if a woman and man were caught in the act of adultery, it was the woman who was stoned to death. A man was not even guilty. In Jesus' response, he does not want to get into with them what is permissible in divorce. It was permissible. According to Jewish law, they could write the certificate. But rather, he focuses on what is God's intent. It was not for a patriarchal, dominant power relationship in a marriage. Jesus reminds the Pharisees of how women and men are equal, and goes so far as to twist the Jewish custom of men leaving father and mother. You notice in this passage he says, and a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. Now, we just read right over that. And I said that this morning. I just always read over that. I kind of read it as man shall leave his woman and, whoever leaves who, it doesn't matter. But here he's saying the man shall leave, and those Pharisees must have had their knickers in a twist because he is talking about accepted norms of the culture. Marriage equality has different questions for us today. And it's hard for us. I think some Christians do want to look at this passage and go, oh, well, see, he says man and woman. But we need to be very careful to look to Scripture to answer questions that it is not asking. And what asking here is that he's looking at a controversy of the day and saying it's not about that. It's about not what is permissible, it's about what is possible. And bringing us all up, men and women, men and men, women, into a place of love with God. The disciples sat silent on the sidelines until they get Jesus alone. And then they want some more clarification. And that's when Jesus kind of really gets down and dirty and starts calling everybody an adulterer. He says, if you divorce your wife and you remarry, then she's an adulterer, and if she divorces, and you're all adulterers. Well, at morning prayer this week, we were talking about this passage. Some of you were there. And we realized as we looked around the room that would mean that almost all of us would need a red A on our forehead. And we did talk about whether I should bring some magic markers and pass them around, but we decided no, we didn't need to do that. That made a lot of us adulterers around the morning prayer circle. But we could go so far as to say, remember that Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, even if you look at a woman, or man, lustfully, you've committed adultery in your heart. So then none of us get off the hook, married or not married, remarried or divorced. This past week, it has been troubling to follow the unfolding story of the Pope's visit with Kim Davis, the Kentucky clerk who refused to give marriage license to same-sex couples. For many, we felt that this secret meeting and blessing seemed to reveal a hypocrisy of the Pope. And during his visit in the U.S., in every encounter and speech, he seemed to offer a hopeful word to the poor and the marginalized. But then we learned of his stay strong or keep up the good work message to Kim. And it made us wonder if we had been hoodwinked by a holy facade. This same woman who opposes gay marriage but has been married 4 times, had her children out of wedlock. Her children, or 2 of her children, were fathered by her 3rd husband when she was still married to her 1st husband. Now you go figure that one out. And then, just as I was ready to cast my judgment on her and on the Pope, I learned that when the Pope was in D.C., he also met with an old friend from Argentina and his friend's partner, an openly gay couple. I suspect neither of these encounters was intended to be made public. The difference between the Pope and Jesus is that Jesus never hid the fact that he met, blessed, and touched people who others thought were untouchable. The Pope is an important leader, but he is not Jesus. I am grateful for the Pope and his witness. He did speak loudly on behalf of the poor, of immigrants and refugees, and on behalf of the environment. And those who knew him in Argentina know that he has come a long way, and he is still on a journey. We must remember to pray for him because he is one of the most influential Christian voices in the world. We must pray for him. We must pray for Kim Davis. I know that we too are all on a journey, and we are hopefully day by day discovering what is the way of Jesus and praying that we are moving in a holy direction, open to whatever that is going to look like. This past summer, while on sabbatical, I had a chance to visit a lot with my extended family. I was really jealous of how many of my family members live in close proximity to each other. My own brothers and sisters, we live about 8 to 10 hours apart, even 12 to my sister. So I don't see them. But when I was visiting family, they all live in the same town. So they're at baptisms and barbecues and birthdays and all those things. And they just look like they have so much fun all the time. And I was so jealous. And then, of course, one night after the party was over and everybody went home, I found out that everything wasn't as good as I thought. You know, there was a lot of unfinished business, a lot of ugly feelings. Do you have any unresolved feelings with any family members? Yeah, I thought so. Marriage and family are really hard. It's really hard what we are asked to do, what is possible. And it takes a lot of vulnerability and honesty and gritty Holy Spirit strength to hold it together. And the truth is, sometimes we can't hold it together. Sometimes it just doesn't stay. Many of you probably don't know that my husband was married before. So I'm an adulterer. I'm an adulteress. He was married before. And I had many friends who, when we fell in love and wanted to get married, who pointed out this passage to me and said, how can you consider marrying someone who's divorced? When I talked to my mom about my love for David and wanting to get married and that he'd been married before, she responded with, Susan, everyone deserves a second chance at love. I thought, way to go, Ma. David and I have been married for 21 years. Not always easy, but wonderful. Back to the disciples. Let's try to imagine the scene as the disciples are still trying to process all this divorce and adultery. And as they are talking, they are noticing that there are some parents who are bringing a bunch of wiggly, rambunctious, dirty diapered, messy children, and they're getting closer to Jesus. We know the scenario. The disciples say, stop right there. Go. You know, Jesus is busy. We're talking about deep theological things. Go. And Jesus says, no, come here to me. This is the most theological thing that we do. Jesus has upset the Pharisees and the disciples with elevating the role of women, and now he is going to upset them even more by the role of children. Now, for us, it doesn't make any sense because we have elevated the role of children in our lives. And so for us, it may be a very sentimental scene of Jesus and the children. Isn't it lovely? But it was not sentimental in that day. Children were nothing. Children were lower than women, and they were dispensable. Sometimes you didn't name your children, and in some cultures still today, you don't name your children until they're 5 because so many of them die. They don't matter. And Jesus is saying, let them come. They do matter. This must give any disciple that might want to give a cold stare to a child who can't sit still, or any disciple who's tempted to ask a parent, can't you take that child home? Pause. Because Jesus is uncompromising on some questions. He says, come, you are welcome here. Because in the end, it doesn't matter so much the questions we have. Because Jesus will take all of our questions and our doubts. But rather, how willing are we to wrestle with the unsettling and disruptive presence of Jesus, who is the answer in himself, who wants to fill our deepest longing and draw us to himself, whether that be by a gentle prod, a harsh rebuke, a thoughtful challenge, profound wisdom, all the ways that Jesus calls us deeper into God's love, so that we are not just living by what is permissible, but what is possible. And my prayer for myself and us is Jesus, use whatever means necessary to help us live into your possible. Amen.